Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, it's Jessa back for another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. I am so glad you have chosen to spend this bit of time with me, and I hope you find it enriching, informative, maybe even inspiring. I am, you may not realize this, but I batch record these things on Mondays usually, so I sometimes have as many as 5 or 6 interviews in a day. But every single one is so fascinating. I think all of these topics are so important. That's why I seek these people out. And today's is no exception. I wanted to address basically cancer. How ravaging this can be to our sense of self, our sense of ourselves as a sexual person, to our sexual relationship. So my guest today is going to talk about specifically women who have had cancer, because Tara Galeano, teaches a group where she is in Boulder. She's a certified sex therapist there. And she's been teaching a group for years for women who are cancer survivors. And she has developed really a program and a process for helping women rediscover their body. That's actually the name of her class, Rediscovering My Body. So anyway, she's got a ton of information and insight and is able to give some really helpful tips right away, but also some resources for people that might be struggling with this and want some extra support. So I'm so excited she's here with me today, and I hope you get a lot out of it. So Tara, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yes, my pleasure. Such an honor to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be a great conversation, I can tell. So why don't you start out, if you don't mind, just talking a little bit about what it is you do and maybe how you came into this work.
Sure. So I'm a certified sex therapist and a licensed professional counselor. And I started this work because I decided, as many people do when they graduate from Naropa University, that they want to stay in Boulder, Colorado. And so, so I started actually working for the university as one of their subsidized counselors. They didn't have an in-house counseling center. So they hired me and a bunch of other people to work externally. And all of the students, go figure, wanted to talk about sex and sexuality. And I had not had one class on human sexuality in my graduate studies, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that was, at the end of the 90s, so the late 90s, where I graduated in 2000.
Right.
So I needed to get up to speed. So I became certified as a sexologist and then later became certified as a sex therapist. And then most recently, I started working with women who've had cancer within the past 6 years. I started working at Boulder Community Health and teaching a class there that I developed and created all the content for women. And it's probably my favorite part of the work that I get to do because it's so amazing to meet all of these courageous women who have gone through cancer.
Yeah. Well, so what got you into that? I think you said 6 years ago. Was it, a personal thing or just a coincidence in terms of your clientele? Like what happened that pulled you towards working with women and cancer?
Yeah. So I love working with groups, and group sex therapy was a really hard sell. And I know it's like, So I couldn't seem to get enough people into the groups. However, when it was a didactic group like this was, it seemed like it was so much easier to fill. So the psychoeducational piece really came together. And my friend, Nana Bo Christensen, who's a nurse navigator at Boulder Community Health, she wanted someone to come in who was a mental health professional and a sex therapist to talk about sex after cancer, because all of the women in her breast cancer support group wanted to talk about it. And it seemed like none of the providers were speaking about it with them, and they didn't know where to go.
Right.
So they were talking to their massage therapist or their physical therapist or somebody who had intimate touch contact with them. And that was great. So they were getting some of their questions answered, but not all of them. And so I started going to the groups and started talking about what was happening for them that they may not have known or may not have been addressed through other routes. And so that's kind of the collision of where it all came together. And then I decided that we needed to create a class and just have a regular class that women can come to. So we offer it in the fall, we offer it in the spring, and I'm in the process of creating that so women everywhere can have access to that information.
Right, by doing it as an online course, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds to me like it's not like you went through sex therapy training with a particular focus on dealing with cancer. It's like you met these women, you're in this group, you're hearing the questions they have, the concerns they have. I imagine you're hearing what they did or did not hear from their medical providers, that would inform part of what you develop too, right? Is the lack of attention to this topic or the misinformation they must have gotten, I'm imagining.
Yes. There's so much, for the providers, I know that they're very limited on time, so they don't have a bunch of time to focus on other things besides what they're going in to talk with a client about what's pertinent to their treatment. And sex and sexuality is often not, up at the top of the list. Yeah. So I know there's that time constraint. And then there's the other piece that oftentimes the providers don't feel comfortable speaking about sex and sexuality, and they figure somebody else is going to talk about it.
Right.
And no one does.
Yeah, that's certainly not part of their training. I mean, generally anyway, right? They have almost no training on sex and certainly on sexuality and healthy sexual functioning.
Yeah.
You're right. So if they don't have the time or the training or the background to really take that on.
Yes. Yeah. And so it just seemed like a natural fit for me to come in and start speaking about these issues with women. And for myself, where it connects for me personally, I've never had cancer, but what I do know and through my own experience is that there's so many obstacles in our life that impact us as women in terms of our body image, in terms of our relationships, in terms of our ability to be sexual or connect with our own sexuality. And I certainly feel like I've made all of the mistakes and lived through all of those experiences that have debilitated me. And I know that I've given my power to other people that I've been in relationship with, and I don't want to live like that anymore. And it's really important for me to connect with other women in an empowering way and help them go through the process, especially after something as debilitating as cancer. I feel like that's a huge, huge challenge. And I see these women as like phoenixes rising from the fire because they're so courageous. And I really want to be there and help them through this process in whatever way I can be.
Yeah. And it seems like the challenges, like there would be some that are uniquely related to cancer itself, the disease, the treatment, right? The prognosis. And then it seems like a number of the challenges that women would face would be the same whether they had cancer or not, right? Like you're saying about not being empowered or not knowing what you want or not knowing how to communicate or not having boundaries or whatever, all those challenges that we all face to some degree would just be that much more prominent, right? When you're dealing with cancer as well.
Yes, absolutely. So I try to break it down to the pieces that are general, and I actually start mostly with the general because I think body image is a big piece for most women. So I actually start there, and then I go into trauma because I think trauma is something that has overwhelmed our nervous system, and all of us living in our bodies for a couple of decades have experienced some sense of that. So I go into that piece next, and then what I love about working with the women in this group is that they support each other. And so the content becomes this process of how they're being with each other, supporting each other. And then they dive into what lives in the group. They dive into the pieces of, I had colorectal cancer or I had reproductive cancer and I didn't have breast cancer. And that's harder in some ways. And it's more shameful because people make assumptions or people can say breast cancer, but they can't say colorectal cancer. And it's hard. So getting into the nuances of what their experience has been with the disease, with the treatment, with the medicines afterwards.
Yeah. All right. So tell me, the course is called Rediscovering My Body, right?
Yes.
So maybe could you go through it a little bit? I mean, obviously we don't have weeks or hours, but the highlights of sort of what you cover and what the takeaways are maybe in each stage of it, something like that.
Sure, sure. So we started, when we began this class, it was a 6-week class, and it was so great because we thought, oh my goodness, we're going to really dive into all of these topics. And the reality is that 6 weeks is a long time to commit to a process. And what I found is that for women, particularly if they've had cancer, that they've been challenged financially, psychologically, emotionally, and energetically, like they just may not have the energy to come to every class. And so it can be really, goodness, important to keep it short. So we had to cut things down to 4 weeks, and we're like, what do we get into 4 weeks? So really bare bones. So I would say this is kind of a overview of what it is that we get into, because the depths are so much greater, and we're just kind of on the surface. So the first piece we get into is the body image piece, which I think all of the women can relate to from prior to their cancer experience, but certainly after their cancer experience, whether they've had some type of surgical alteration, a mastectomy, or scars, or goodness, I mean, I think those are the biggest pieces.
Yeah, yeah.
And we do that by going into the activity of a body map. So, so I think that's a pretty popular one. People really enjoy this process because it transcends words, because they're creating a visual image of what it is that they experience in their body in terms of pleasure and in terms of discomfort. So they create this external image, and it's an intimate experience because they're pairing up with a woman that they may not know, and that woman is tracing the outline of their body.
Oh, okay.
And yes, And so with that outline, and I like to keep it simple because I'm not a visual artist. I say red, don't touch me, green, go, and yellow, maybe. But what I see is these women really are artists. They love to draw, and they create beautiful masterpieces, like decoupage masterpieces, where they're cutting out pieces of magazines and gluing them, mountains for where they feel empowered and majestic, and flowers for the delicate parts of themselves where they like to be, soft and sensual. And so really differentiating for themselves where it is that they like to be touched and how they like to be touched in those areas. And not all of them use the red for don't touch me there. They might just something completely different, like a valley, or like, a moat where there's no bridge. So the women are very creative, and then they have to share it with each other. So they come to class after the next week. They've taken it home. They've started it in class, but oftentimes they don't finish it. And so they come back to class, and they start speaking about what it is that moved them about this process, or what it is that they learned about themselves through this process. And they start sharing and articulating and using words to describe parts of their body and to describe their experience, and creating this vocabulary that they didn't necessarily have before. Mm-hmm. And so it's this amazing process of self-discovery in a deceptively simple exercise.
Yeah.
But also, and it's transcending the verbal, because not all of us are all so verbal, which I'm just learning. And the visual aspect is so powerful because they can just point to a part of their body and say, this is where I like to be touched. And they can, show that to other people, whether it's their lover or a friend or somebody that they feel intimate with. So after the women have shared it in the group, I invite them to go home and share it with their lover or their partner. And if they want, because they want to level the playing field, or because they want to know more about their own partner, invite their partner to do the activity as well.
Right.
They do the body map for them, and to date it, because we're dynamic beings, and we're ever evolving and always changing. And that 6 months from now, what they experience in these parts of their body as pleasure may change to ecstasy, or it may level off, but to date it and then create another one as they feel moved. So I think that's a great way to start the conversation about
absolutely.
sexuality.
And it strikes me that, trying to get to know your body map now as opposed to pre-cancer, pre-treatment, things will be different. So what do you want now? What are these different parts? How do you relate to them now?
Yeah.
That's really crucial. Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge, because I think so many people, but women in particular, want to have what they used to have. And so
Yeah.
want to go back. I mean, and the reality is that we're all getting older. None of us can ever go back in time.
Right.
Right. So it's just like accepting where we're at today.
Yeah.
And then how do we embrace that? How do we love that? How do we at least live with that? And then move forward in the direction that we want to be with ourselves and with our partner.
Yeah.
So I think that's really the beauty of it, is that we're not looking at the past so much, but really how the past has informed how we are today, and then how we're moving forward with these experiences of surgery, of alterations in our physiology, and also the sensations. I think that that's a really big piece too, is that the women then get a better understanding of the sensations, where one place they may feel pain, and that's absolutely don't touch me there, but another place may feel numb. And it may have been an erogenous zone. And so it's not pleasure, but it's not pain, but it's this numbness.
Yeah.
And what is that? And that's a really great place to bring curiosity of what is that numbness, and can it be cultivated into something more pleasurable? Is that something that you desire, or is it okay that it's numb?
Right.
And what does that numbness tell you? Or does it tell you anything? And so really inviting people, the women, to be curious about the experiences or the sensations that they have as they explore their body through this body map.
Right. Right. Okay. And you said part 2 was trauma?
Yes.
Right into that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we go right into trauma after doing the body map, which is interesting because they have, again, more awareness of the sensation. So they know where the pleasure is, they know where the numbness is, and they also know where the pain is.
Right.
And with the pain, goodness, can be contraction, stress, or trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So I invite them through the process of Dr. Berselli's trauma releasing exercises, which are 6 deceptively simple exercises which invoke shaking. And the shaking is an opportunity for release and restoration of the nervous system.
Mm.
And it doesn't resonate with everybody. And I get that.
Yeah.
But I think it is a powerful tool, and why I like it, just like the body map, is that the women then can take away these activities and do them as they like. So the trauma releasing exercises they can do in the privacy of their own home. They don't need a therapist to help them unpack everything, because there's no narrative or there's no storyline that one follows or that emerges through this process, because the body has its own inherent wisdom, and the body knows the truth. So the body shakes out or releases through the tremors, and there's not necessarily a storyline or emotions that emerge with it. So I think it's a very powerful technique, one that I've, again, used personally, and that's how I know that it's impactful, is that I had a couple of car accidents and I struggled with insomnia, and
Wow.
I could not sleep, and I was anxious about driving, but even more than that, I could not sleep. And then, I did the more familiar routes, EMDR, brain spotting, they all got to a certain level, but I kept on having to come back to the narrative. And I thought, goodness, if I had to tell the story one more time,
Yeah.
I'm going to scream. So I started doing trauma releasing exercises at the recommendation of a friend, and I found them to be so, again, impactful and restorative to my nervous system that I could sleep, that I could really rest. And it eradicated the insomnia for me completely, and really helped me come back to a different level of homeostasis, where I felt like I was healed.
Is it possible to share like the rudimentary instructions? I mean, for listeners who are thinking, oh, what is this trauma releasing exercise, the shaking thing? What would they do? Or is it too much to get into here?
I think it's a little bit too much to get into. And just for proprietary reasons, I know Dr. Berselli's not much of a businessman, but it'd be nice if he could make a living off of this. He sells an app.
Okay, so he's got an app for this, or a book or something like that people...
Yes, he has a couple of books, and his website's traumaprevention.com, and I highly recommend it.
Okay.
And it really is, and it's similar to other modalities that invoke the shaking mechanism, like somatic experiencing, except that's moderated by a therapist, whereas trauma releasing exercises are something that you can do, again, by yourself.
All right, I'll put that link in the show notes so people want to pursue that could do that.
Yes, exactly. I highly recommend it. I think it's great. So I teach that to the women. I'm a level 2 provider with Dr. Briselli trauma releasing exercises, and I teach women, and the level 2 provider is able to work within a group. And I love that. Again, for the group experience, I think it's exponentially more healing to have that resonance with other organisms, that it's our own personal experience. And then there's the resonance with the others and what they're experiencing. And I think through that process, it's very, I'm going to say, calming, relaxing to the nervous system, and that women find it to be really impactful. So there's modifications we can do if people are uncomfortable in some of the exercises, which is a great thing about working with a provider, especially for women who've had cancer and they're not necessarily feeling comfortable in their bodies, which is a whole nother issue that we get into. That they're able to do the exercises, feel successful through the process of the modification. So I work with them around that.
Okay. Hey, it's Jess. I'm taking just a quick break in the middle of the show to make sure you know about my online course. I had written a book called Sex Without Stress, and rather than throw it on you to work through that whole process by yourself, I decided to put together a course to walk you through the whole program. 10 weeks long, all kinds of teaching webinars, materials, homework, structured activities, and open office hours so that you get the support and the help you need to make the change that you want. You can learn all about it at sexwithoutstress.com/program. And then where do you go from there in your class?
Well, then we really look at what lives in the group. And I think that's so important. So oftentimes it's different for different groups.
Right.
So sometimes we focused on fertility issues. Other times we've worked on betrayal, pornography, relational issues. Sometimes women are not all in relationship and they're interested in dating. And what does that mean for them as they go out? And I love the juxtaposition of different experiences, different values, different orientations. I mean, I think all of that creates a much richer group. And I think the human perspective is the grass is always greener. And,
right.
And then they find out maybe not so. So it's really good to have those dialogues about what's existing for them after cancer.
Right.
So that's the richness of it. And most of the focus is on relationship at that point, some form of relationship, whether they want a relationship or a significant relationship, or the relationship with themselves or the relationship with other. What I find in terms of significant others is that oftentimes they've been a caregiver for the woman, and they don't understand how then to improve the relationship where they can be sexual again. They don't understand how to, follow the woman's cues, and they feel like she will know what I need to do, because if I touch her, then I might hurt her, and I don't want to hurt her. And the women also feel like I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing or what I'm supposed to be telling my partner, but they have this expectation that I'm supposed to be doing something, or maybe they don't find me attractive. And then this chasm between the two of them just grows, and they don't know how to navigate it. And so they've really lost the roles of being lovers with each other, and it's just this caregiver dynamic. So I work with the woman to address that effectively within her partnership. And so that seems to be a really critical piece. And the women really enjoy that because they feel stuck. I mean, really, they feel like they don't know how to move forward. They don't know how to reconnect with their lover in a meaningful way that's different than how they did it in the past, because everything's so different for each of them. Sometimes the caregiver has had cancer as well. And so it's a whole conversation then about how they can connect sensually, how they can connect meaningfully, how they can connect in an intimate way that feeds both of them, that they both feel good about.
Yeah.
So I also offer a workshop for couples that address that, but I like to do it in the scope of the class too. So this way the women can start having that conversation with their significant other and start looking at some of the things that have impacted their relationship and how they are intimate with each other now, or how they're not, or what does that mean to be sexual now with each other after cancer?
Do you feel like that's the biggest obstacle women face with cancer and sexuality? This idea that we've shifted away from being lovers into being sick and caretaker kind of roles, or maybe I should say, what are the biggest obstacles you hear about?
I think that's a very big one. I do think that that's a very big one. I think, and again, that's why I begin with the body image, is I think it's the relationship the woman has with herself, is that oftentimes she doesn't feel sexy. She may or may not feel confident. She may feel tired a lot of the time. She may feel like her energy has been spent on so many other things. And then to come to sexuality doesn't feel replenishing, that it feels like a chore. So those are, I think, some of the big obstacles as well, in addition to their relationship.
Yeah. So how does the course, as I'm listening to you describe it, I'm thinking, oh, this would be great for everybody.
Yeah, I think so too.
It's not cancer specific. So, what are the particular benefits for women that have had cancer, do you think, out of this that maybe go further than, for the rest of us?
Yes. Yeah. I think it comes back to that third class of what's living in the group, because some women specifically want to know about, dilators or lubricants that are helpful, or something specific to how tamoxifen has impacted their desire. So we go into some of that. But what I like to say is that a lot of that can be Googled,
Yeah.
It's like, it's like, okay, so, but what I work with is more of the mystery then of how are we relating to each other, and how do we feel sexy after we've had a chronic illness or a life-threatening illness? So I'm really looking at the bigger picture. I see myself more as that guide who can help people with that process than really specifically looking at the drugs and how they've impacted them. Because again, I feel like you can Google that and we can talk about that. And certainly that is welcome. But I think the larger pictures is where I want the women to live into, because I think it's also much more connecting. I think the process of being in the group is very normalizing for the women, because they feel like these are my sisters and we've all gone through this, life-threatening, life-changing illness called cancer. And they connect with each other in a very different way than they would with somebody who has not had that experience. And I see that. And I think there's this relaxation of, oh, you've got my back, or you understand me in a way that other people don't. And I would have to explain myself so much more.
Right.
If you had not had that experience. And I think that's just true for us as humans on so many levels, and ways that we identify with our identity or certain characteristics of being in the world. And for these women, that's this exhalation of we can connect with each other.
Right.
And I love that. And I feel honored to be able to provide the space for that connection. That I think is specific to women who've had cancer. And then the conversation that emerges from that. And I provide the content, which is kind of this, path, if you will, but it is so much more than that. And oftentimes I just need to be quiet and not, push my agenda and just let things be, because these women have got so much wisdom to share.
Yeah. So I'm also wondering if you have something to say about the different kinds of cancer that women face, and what does that mean for the kind of challenges they typically have, or the kind of process or outcome they move towards,
Yes. I do see a lot of women who've had breast cancer. The woman who helped me create this class, the nurse navigator, was a breast cancer nurse navigator. So when she was filling the class and the support groups that I was going to, they were breast cancer. So predominantly I've worked with a lot of women who've had breast cancer. And I would say body image was a huge piece for them, and also the numbness. And I think, goodness, it varied from person to person, as it always does. But I think also for a lot of those women, that they identified as being a woman through their connection with their breasts, and how then other people would perceive them if they did not have breasts, if they didn't choose reconstruction. And then if they were not in a long-term relationship, how would they go out and meet people, and how people would view them? Would they see them as a sexual being because they did not have breasts? I mean, I think there's all of these layers to that, and unpacking that and really diving into then what is the essence of being a woman, and what does it mean for them? And then how can they feel sexy, and how can they really connect to being confident and sexy? That's a whole pathway in and of itself. And then for women who may have had a cancer like reproductive cancer, which may not be as visible, or that the stressors are different, especially if she's in an intimate relationship. How are they going to have intercourse? What does that mean? If they were having penetrative intercourse before, now what does it look like? And how are they going to be intimate with each other today? And will that change in, a couple of years, or what about it will change? And so that reconnection process is very different and difficult. And I think there's not a lot of people who are having conversations about that. I had one woman, and I'm trying to think of what type of cancer that she had. Yeah, I can't remember. I don't think it was a reproductive cancer, but she was not told to use dilators because the radiation and the chemotherapy shrunk her vaginal canal. And so she needed to use dilators to help with the expansion. But nobody told her that. And she was coming into my office for relational issues with her husband, and it was 5 years out. She had been treated 5 years ago for the last time for her type of cancer. No one told her to use dilators to help with that. And so she was coming in with symptoms of painful intercourse. And she said, my vaginal canal has shrunk. And I know it's because of the chemo and the radiation, but she said, what am I supposed to do about this now? And I can't have penetrative sex with my husband. I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe nobody's talked to you about this. So we had her, do a course or a round with the dilators, and I showed her the dilators that I keep in my office, and she'd never even seen them before.
Yeah.
So and that was just 5 years ago. So it's not that long ago. So I know that this work is so important, and that information just needs to be put out there about how to help women regain their confidence, get information about what it means to be sexual again after cancer. And again, it looks different for each type of cancer, but getting the information out there. And I know a lot of women talk to, again, their physical therapist or massage therapist, someone that they're feeling like has intimate connection with them because they're touching them physically, where they can see the alterations in their body or the scars. And so then they can talk with them a little bit more easily, which is so great. So the physical therapist, the massage therapist, they're getting the word out there, which is wonderful. But we all need to know something, we all need to be able to start this conversation.
Yeah. And it seems to me, no matter what type of cancer, reproductive or breast cancer or whatever, they all sort of strike at potentially the sense of ourselves as what's our sexuality, what's our femininity, what's, our identity as women and as sexual creatures gets thrown for a loop with some of this stuff, beyond the just feeling bad and going through the ravages of treatment, that there's this core identity piece, in relationship to our body that needs to get repaired.
Yes. Yes. And along with that, I think there's issues of grief that need to be addressed. There's certainly issues of shame, and also the sense of betrayal that their body, who they've lived in for so many decades and have taken good care of, I've eaten well, I've exercised, and all of a sudden I have cancer, and how that feels to them. And again, the sense of betrayal and grief. And then how can I trust my body again to really experience pleasure? And that seems like a long way off, but the ability to relax into the body and experience pleasure is critical. And oftentimes the women feel like they have to be very willful because they've been in survivor mode for so long that it's hard to relax into, okay, I can experience pleasure. Okay, I can really rest. And the other piece about the class that's difficult is for the woman to prioritize herself first, because she's taken off so many resources to heal or to just be alive, and then to take the time to experience pleasure or to reconnect to her body feels indulgent. And it feels like, oh, can I really do that when I could be home with my family having dinner, or I should be making dinner for them, or I could stay late at work? And so all of those things come up for the woman as she decides to make herself a priority and then attend the class and get the information that she would really like to have. So it's a fascinating process. And I limit the group to only 8 women because I think that it's important to have that intimate experience where they can speak and also hear what the other women are saying and really be able to hold that. I think when it exceeds 8, it gets a little bit too overwhelming. But 8 seems like a very safe, intimate number to create that container.
Right. All right. Well, I want to give you the opportunity to just say a little bit more about you and where people can find out about the class or your, as you develop this into an online course. Where do people find out more?
Well, right now, I will have to send you the link because I don't know it offhand.
Okay.
But my website is bouldersextherapy.com.
Okay.
And I have a Facebook page, which is Boulder Sex Therapy. And I do a live Facebook every Thursday, 10 at 10 Mountain Time, and people are welcome to join me and ask questions to a certified sex therapist. And I've been doing this now for 2 years. And I oftentimes have the links to podcasts that I'm guests on, and also for the retreats that I host. So this class, Boulder Community Health, has been hosting for 6 years, Rediscovering My Body, is now going to be a retreat because I want women to be able to come to beautiful Colorado for 3 days, just dive into the material, really deepen into it, feel safe and secure in that this is just going to be their time, and then be able to leave and go back to their lives and touch back in as they need to, because I am here as a resource, and take it into their relationship and into their lives and integrate that process for themselves. So it is a retreat. The first retreat, the inaugural retreat, will be this November, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and it's here in beautiful Boulder, Colorado. And then I am hosting a webinar, and I'll share the link for that as well.
Wonderful.
And that's just an opportunity for a discovery call so you can learn more about this work and see where it fits for you in your life.
Yeah. Please do send those links, and I'll stick them in the show notes for everybody.
Okay, great. Wonderful.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jessa. I really appreciate it.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.